Early. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mason Becker. Thanks for joining us on this live stream. This is the very first virtual town hall that I've been a part of. And you can see I'm joined by Tom Palzewicz, who is our excellent candidate running for Congress in the 5th Congressional District. So Tom has done at least one virtual town hall before. This is my first time for us doing it together. So hopefully there's no technical hiccups, but just bear with us. And Tom, you can take it away.
Yeah, so very excited about this. So I'm Tom Palzewicz. I'm running in the 5th Congressional District here in Wisconsin. And just wanted to tell you a little bit about why I'm running. So I'll probably a lot of you already know I ran in 2018 against Jim Sensenbrenner. And one of the main reasons I ran against Sensenbrenner at that time is one, he had been in office for 40 years. And I thought somebody being in office for 40 years was just, it doesn't make a lot of sense for our country and for our representation. And the other thing is the Trump election really got me moving to say, what are the things that I need to do to get out there and start changing the dynamic that caused this president to be elected in the first place. And we did pretty well. We spent almost 18 months campaigning, getting out, talking to people. I called it meeting every single Democrat that we could in Waukesha County, in Jefferson County, Dodge County, Washington County, parts of Milwaukee County. And it was really great. I mean, we met a lot of people, and we took a district that had been traditionally 70-30 Republican and narrowed it down to 62-38. And the result of that is Jim Sensenbrenner retired, which is fantastic. So now we're looking at this race, and it is it's an open seat. And the great thing is this doesn't happen that often, especially here in Wisconsin. But the key is I think it's time for this red district, this 5th Congressional District that is between Milwaukee and Madison. It's time to turn it purple. And it has been turning purple for a while. Mason, it's one of the reasons you're running. I know that. And it's time to get better representation. It's time to get representation for the people in Washington. It's something we haven't had in this district for a long time. And what really got me moving was, like I said before, that Trump election. But the thing that I see over and over again is we have too many people who just want to say no and they want to bully, not only in Washington, but here in Wisconsin. And, you know, I look at people like Mitch McConnell. I look at Donald Trump. I look at a couple of other people, especially on the House side, Republicans. All they want to do is say no. And what that got us was the time when we need government to really be working for us, which is in the middle of a pandemic. It's not doing very well. We need competent people. We need efficiency. We need effectiveness in government to be able to handle these types of things. And the dismantling of the government over the last 30 to 40 years has been one of those things that has left us in this situation. So I want to go and I want to represent. We need to kick these bullies out, and we need a much more collaborative government, and we need to be fighting for the people. So we're very excited about our race. We have a path to victory. We're running. It looks like we'll be running against Scott Fitzgerald, who I like to call him our own Mitch McConnell, because he is just a guy who loves to say no. And he doesn't have a plan of his own. I think you see it right now with him and Robin Vos going to the state Supreme Court to try to keep the governor from his plan versus creating their own plan. They're in charge of the legislature, and I haven't seen them legislate one iota. Every time they don't like things, they go to the court. And this is something that, you know, the last thing I think we need is a Scott Fitzgerald in Congress, because we already have enough of those. But it's really about representation, and it's really about healthcare. I think we've seen healthcare is a huge problem for people. It's a bigger problem now because a lot of people are losing their jobs, and most of people's healthcare is tied to their employment. You know, at the same time, Trump is trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act while people are becoming unemployed. It's going to be a lot more people who need more healthcare, especially during this time. The climate, you know, one of the great weird side effects of this pandemic is our planet is sort of taking a breath. It's getting a chance to heal. You know, and fossil fuel usage is way down. We're seeing a whole bunch of things happen. But what I'd love to see is a plan to restart the economy that uses a lot more renewable fuels than fossil fuels as we move forward. And then gun violence. I think it's still an issue that we're going to have to address at some point. There has anecdotally been less. There's been less mass shootings and other things that have been happening lately, but that's because everybody is forced to stay home. It's not as if the problem is going to go away. It's going to come back, and we need a sensible plan to deal with it. So those are the key reasons I'm running. And the other one is the economy. I think it's going to take a Herculean effort to make sure that small business owners, independent contractors, and people that have been on the fringe of this so-called good economy are going to be able to work their way back into economy and make a living again. Because if we don't have a great plan for them, they're going to get left behind. And it's really going to get, I think it's going to be a big challenge for the federal government to put some policies in place to allow that to happen. So those are the big things that I just wanted to make sure that people understood that that's where I'm coming from. And I think this seat is a winnable seat, and I'm excited to be able to work with people like Mason who are running in the assembly. So I'm going to hand it over to Mason and let him talk about why he's running.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tom. Yeah, so Tom is just such an awesome candidate. I'm so excited to be running along with the man who chased Jim Sensenbrenner into retirement. I just turned 40 last month, and Jim Sensenbrenner has been there a little bit longer than I've been alive, so that really says something. But why am I running? Why am I running in this of all years, 2020? It basically boils down to this, other than I had a lot of people like Tom ask me to run. I'm now in my third term serving on the Fort Atkinson City Council, and I was very fortunate and blessed last week to have been elected once again by my peers on the council as Fort Atkinson City Council president. So I'm really excited to be able to serve people in Fort Atkinson that way. And in my almost 6 years in the council, I've seen how government is supposed to work. At the local level, we know how to get things done. We don't worry about, who's a Democrat, who's a Republican, what anybody's political ideology or philosophies are. We come together, we have our debates. Sometimes things actually do get heated and there are arguments, but at the end of the day, we listen to our constituents and we come together and we make the best decisions for the communities that we're serving. And I can only look to what's happening in Madison these past few years, and I just have to shake my head in disgust a little bit. When we saw just a couple weeks ago, in the middle of a pandemic, people being forced, tens of thousands of Wisconsinites being forced to go to the polls, risk their health in places that were understaffed because of the pandemic, many places that didn't have enough polling locations open. People had to wait in some places 3-4 hours just to vote. I don't believe that's how democracy is supposed to work. And other ways democracy is not supposed to work. I'm very frustrated that Governor Evers, who was elected by the people of Wisconsin, was basically kneecapped before he had even been sworn in the lame duck session. And if you go into the open records requests, our legislators, including the one I'm running against, overwhelmingly were told by their constituents that they did not agree with stripping the governor powers before he was even sworn into office. And they didn't listen. They went ahead and did it anyway. So now Governor Evers has to rule, or I shouldn't say rule, he has to lead basically through executive action. And that's not how it should be. It should be the governor working with the legislature to hammer out laws and get things passed that benefit the people of Wisconsin. That's how government is supposed to work. But what it all boils down to is that we need to get back to local control in this state. And the only way we can do that is if we get back to having fair maps. I'm running in a very highly gerrymandered district. Now, I think in 2020, we can make some change happen because I've talked to so many people in this district that are so frustrated about what our local government has come down to, our state government, what it's come down to. I'm running in the only state assembly district that almost had a public school district dissolve. First time it would have happened in decades in this state. And what did our designated leaders in the state capitol do? They took a hands-off approach. They basically said, hey, you local folks, if you don't pass another local spending referendum, it's on you. We're not going to lift a finger to help. And they didn't. And fortunately, after months and months of debate, the state public boundary board, the dissolution board, made the right decision not to dissolve the Palmyra Eagle School District, because they recognize what a disaster it would have been, not just for those communities, but for the surrounding communities. So we need to get back to getting things done for the people that we're supposed to represent. And we need to return to results in our state. So whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, I think now more than ever is a critical time to look at accepting the Medicaid expansion in our state. We've had thousands and thousands of Wisconsinites laid off from their jobs through no fault of their own, now possibly not able to get health care. And do we really want people worrying about going to the doctor if they're experiencing symptoms because they don't know if they'll be able to handle their copays and deductibles? So I think this crisis has brought into view that we need to get things done in healthcare. We need to get things done for small businesses, which, by the way, I'm a small business owner like Tom is. I'm part of a family business that has existed for over 30 years now, started by my parents, Tom and Coral Becker. We're in the restaurant industry, and I'll talk about it more later on, but the COVID-19 pandemic has hit us really, really hard, just like I know it has thousands of small businesses all across Wisconsin. And we need a government, both at the state level and the federal level, that's not just going to go to bat for the corporations when they snap their fingers and ask for a bailout. They need to do a lot more than the PPP program that they initiated, which ran out in a week or so. So I'm sure Tom will hit on that. But, for me, it boils down to we have to return to results. And to do that, both Tom and I, we need your help. This is going to be a tough race, but we're going to do it together. So at this point, if we're starting to get any questions here, we're going to open it up to some questions. Tom, I think we got one that maybe you can take off the bat here.
Sure. One of the questions that just came to us is, tell us the story of when you took on corruption and defeated it head on. It's one of those things that I go back to throughout my career. I think it's always important from an integrity standpoint to be able to say, when you see something, you should say something. And I think the one thing that I point to in my career where it was really hard to do was I was in the banking industry, and I was part of the mortgage industry from 2000 to 2005. So I was the treasurer of U.S. Bank's mortgage company. And it was the heyday of mortgages. There was a lot of stuff that was happening. There were a lot of people getting mortgages, and banks were issuing mortgages to people that maybe shouldn't have been getting them. But the bottom line is there was quite a bit of potential fraud that was happening. And with the bank I was working for, we made a decision to not participate in those loans. And we made it early on. We made it early in, I think, 2002, 2003. And I remember we got called on the carpet by the CEO of the bank many times for not making as much money as the other, like the Wells and the Whamus and the Countrywides of the world, who were basically printing money. And it was tough because our bonuses weren't the kind of bonuses that these other people were getting at these other companies and everything else. And it hit us in the pocketbook, but we knew it wasn't the right thing to do. And the interesting thing that happened, I left banking in 2005 to become a small business owner myself. But when the crash hit in 2008, 2009, the bank I was with went from the 12th largest mortgage company in the country to the 3rd in about a week because of the stability that just the mortgage company had provided. And that was tough. I just remember many times going, man, it's just watching these people make hundreds of thousands of dollars more than I did, and knowing that they weren't worth it, but they were doing things that they had to turn a blind eye to, and it just didn't make any sense. So that was tough, but to me, it was the right thing to do. And I learned that in the Navy. I was on a nuclear submarine for 4 years. And it was really about, you got to do the right thing, because it's not just about you, it's all the other people that are around you. So hopefully that answers your question. Mason, I think you got one up next, right?
Yeah, I've got a couple in there. This is an interesting one. When have you done something impressive against all odds? Okay, I could probably take that a couple different ways, and I hope it based on the question, I hope I don't sound like I'm just, tooting my own horn. I can think of two instances in my life. So I'm part of my family's restaurant business now, but that was actually not my first foray into the world of small business. After I graduated college, I did a couple different things. Went to UW Whitewater, by the way, and I had a couple different jobs. I worked in advertising sales for a while, and as I was working with small business owners in the area, learning what it was like to have to meet a payroll and how tough it could be to find employees and figure out your marketing needs and all of that. I really decided that I wanted to own my own business. And in 2006, I was able to partner with my sister Melanie, and we opened a fitness center over in Oconomowoc. And it was a new concept. It was a 24/7 fitness center. And at the time, I had a lot of people telling me, Mason, you're 26 years old. What do you know about running a business? I mean, come on. You're good, and you're not going to hire anybody right away. You're going to work 6 days a week there yourself. You're really going to do that? Come on. We did it. I was there. We got it off the ground. We had a great response from the public and the community. I worked 6 days a week, pretty much every week. I worked myself so hard, I developed a hernia, literally, that I needed to have surgery for. So it was that time that we finally decided, well, we have to hire an employee. So we hired our first employee at that time. Unfortunately, we were able to do it. We were doing well enough. The other time I can think of is back in 2014. I saw that the local government in the city of Fort Atkinson was taking a really long time to make some very basic decisions. And I just looked around and I knew what I had gone through as a small business owner. I knew that you can't take months and months to make basic decisions because that'll cause you to go out of business. And there was a lot of negativity in the city at the time. And I was approached by a couple people that I really respected. One was our former state representative, Andy Jorgensen. And they said, Mason, you really should run for city council. You should really give it a shot. And at the time, again, my dad, for one, was like, Mason, you're 34. Why the heck do you want to run for city council? Come on, you're too busy. You're part of 2 businesses now. I mean, come on. But I went for it, and I campaigned hard. It was a tremendous experience. I was one of 4 people running for office, and I ended up being the top vote getter. So, and I not to brag too much, but in the 2 times since then, I've been the top vote earner in both of those elections too. So I hope that answered your question without me sounding too conceited.
No, those were fantastic. So, so we got a couple of questions. We can tag team on these. What's one of them is, what's the number one policy you will get done once elected? For me, it's healthcare. I am going to fight very hard to start the implementation of universal healthcare. I think it's going to take some time moving to some kind of system where everybody gets covered. It's going to, because there's the insurance industry, there's all these competing plans and everything else. But we got to start. And I think this pandemic has showed us that our healthcare system is not equipped to handle something like this. And the number one reason it's not equipped, at least the way in my mind, is it's really hard to coordinate across all these different entities. And if there was one way to coordinate across all these entities, it'd be easier to move around PPE. It'd be easier to figure out where things are and where things aren't. Right now, we have these competing things almost from a capitalism structure. People are buying stuff out from other people. It's crazy. So that would be one thing I think we need to get going on right away. And I think there'll be a lot of momentum to a better healthcare plan come this fall.
Awesome. So number one thing I want to get done, every major problem that we have in Wisconsin boils down to the fact that we have legislators who are picking their voters and not the other way around. I want to get fair maps done. And I think the most logical way I've heard to accomplish that is to go to the Iowa model and establish a nonpartisan redistricting board. Now, of course, the majority party in power right now today isn't going to go along with that. But what I'm really excited by is that Governor Evers has created a citizens map committee that is made up of people appointed who are not politicians. They're not biased people. They're not going to worry about voting records in an area. They're going to draw sensible maps that make sense. And then I hope people will be able to actually remember who their state representative is, who their state senator is, and not be confused. Well, you live on one side of this road, I live on the other, and we have two completely different representatives, even though we're in the same community. So we need to get back to fair maps, and the way we do it is through nonpartisan redistricting.
Yeah, excellent. Another question for both of us is, what are your thoughts about measures to reduce gun violence in our country and our state? So Mason, I'll let you handle that one first. So what are you looking at when it comes to the state?
What can we do in terms of reducing gun violence? I think there's a lot of different ways, and I'll just say this. Wisconsin has a rich tradition of whether it's hunting and responsible gun ownership. I don't want to take that away from anybody. I personally am not a gun owner. I've just decided not to do that. I've fired guns before. I've enjoyed it. But I have many friends, relatives who hunt. My parents have land that one of my cousins hunts on every year. One of our friends joins him. But I think a large part of it boils down to keeping guns out of the hands of bad guys. And the two most sensible things I think we can do in terms of reducing gun violence and keeping our kids in our schools safe are red flag laws that people will go through, and there'll be a flag if they try to buy a gun and they've got a criminal record or that kind of thing, and universal background checks. I mean, we can do that responsibly. Other states do it. There's ways we can do it where it's relatively quick. It's not going to infringe on anyone's Second Amendment rights, but it's going to help keep our kids and our communities safe. I'll quickly share a story. I have a friend who's a school teacher in another community, and they have to go through, of course, the active shooter training drills. And she told me and my wife one time, we were sitting out for dinner, she's had to think, her classroom's on the second story of this school building, and is she gonna, if there was, heaven forbid, something happening in the school, is she gonna take the chance to lock the door, or is she gonna actually throw her kids out the window? They'll probably survive, they might break a leg, but I don't think any teacher should be put in the position of having to make that consideration. So we need to do better to keep our kids safe.
Yeah, that is a great point. Putting these teachers in these absolutely terrible situations and expecting them to be heroes when we're afraid to be able to do something about it. I'm glad you brought up like the gun culture in Wisconsin and hunting and everything else. Yeah, I grew up as a hunter. I was actually an NRA member in the 70s when I was a teenager. I used to do a lot of shooting at the range, and I hunted for a while. And I personally am glad that we have hunters in our state, because if you've ever hit a deer with a car, that's not a lot of fun. And, so one of the things that really bothers me the most when Republicans talk about Democrats and guns is we're coming for your guns. And nothing can be farther from the truth. It's so disingenuous to say that, because I know a lot of people that own guns. I have a gun. And I think it's really important to understand, what we want is people to be responsible with their weapons. And you brought up red flag laws. You brought up background checks. I've got an uncle who was a police officer in Fond du Lac for many years, and we've had some great conversations about guns and everything else. And what it boils down to is it would be nice if people treated the guns with respect and handled them the way they need to handle them. But that's just not the way it works for some people, which is why we need better universal background checks. We need better red flag laws. I don't think people should own AR-15s. And it's more about muzzle velocity than anything else. You talk to doctors who try to patch people up. It doesn't work very well, because those guns are meant to put people down and keep them down. Those aren't the things that we need in our society. So do we need guns in the hands of hunters? Yes, it's one of our rights and our freedoms that we have. But I think there are a lot of common sense things. 80% of us agree that there should be universal background checks. So we should just do it. but we got to get rid of the Mitch McConnells and the Scott Fitzgeralds of the world to actually have a vote on it so that people can hold their legislators accountable for their votes. So I think we got another question on climate change. I'm just going to jump in on climate change on a national level. One of the things I'm really impressed by is the work that's been done on carbon fee and dividend. Actually putting a fee on carbon and then once a quarter sending a dividend check out to everybody to offset the extra costs. And then you get to choose how much carbon you want to use. It's going to drive the use of carbon down. It's an exchange type process. It doesn't change the way you do things. You're not told what to do. It's up to you to make economic choices, but it's a brilliant way to engage the marketplace. It's a great first step. It's not enough, but I think we need to be investing more in renewable energy. We need to be looking at a whole bunch of other ways to power our economy, and we need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. So those are the things that I think on climate change. Mason? Great.
Yeah, I'll just touch on that really briefly. I'm kind of the mind that you think globally and act locally, and for me, it boils down to local control. People should be able to say, they should have a say if they're going to have like a huge CAFO operation in their township. They should be able to have a say if there's going to be a new rock quarry opening up in their community. And I've heard so much about the CAFO issue, which doesn't directly so much impact the 33rd Assembly District, but it's kind of far and wide throughout Wisconsin. I think we need to do more to help our small family farmers that generally do a very good job of managing the waste and minimal pollution that they put out compared to some of these bigger factory operations.
Yeah, so I think those are really good questions, sort of broad-based. I think our questions now are more geared toward, one, how are we going to do things across the aisle? But two, really talking about how we going to reopen in a safe, in a way that makes sense, and then how are we going to start getting the economy back? So, Mason, if you want to talk about working across the aisle briefly, I think it's a big thing when you talk about if we're going to be purple, how do we work both sides of the aisle to get things done?
Yeah, I think there's still hope. For one thing, we need more members of the current majority party, the Republican Party, to be able to stand up to their leaders, Robin Vos and Scott Fitzgerald, and say, no, we actually do want to take some votes on some things, whether it's, for example, the special session on gun violence, whether it's the special session to address the coronavirus, whether it's a special session to address education. Because they're hearing it from their constituents. A lot of their constituents are not happy. And I firmly believe that while I may not agree today with a lot of the views of the Republican Party currently, I think most people that run for office and go to Madison, they do it at least initially wanting to get things done. And they want to do good by the people who voted them in. We may not agree on every single issue or how to accomplish those goals, but I think we can come together and reach out. I just read an article yesterday. One of the state senators from Milwaukee, and of course, I'm totally blanking on his name right now. He's a great guy. And then Senator Bernier, who is a Republican woman. I've seen her in a committee hearing, and she's actually a nice woman, I think. I don't know her personally or anything, but they were talking in this news article about how they could come together and work on a few certain things in terms of voting in the November election, actually. I don't think the Republicans are totally going to be on board with, for example, sending absentee ballots to every registered voter in the state. But I think they want to run still a safe and efficient election. And I think there's still ways we can do that, and we can reach across the aisle. But by the same token, we don't get there if people vote for the same people and the same party over and over and over again. I think if there's a year for change, it's 2020.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I'm going to go back to what you had talked about earlier, gerrymandering. I think gerrymandering has allowed us to have people at the state legislature and even in Congress who they don't, in fact, they'll get penalized for working with people. Not only do they not want to work with people, they'll actually get penalized by their party if they work with across the aisle. And I think that's the part that needs to change if we're going to get out of this and start working together. But this has been a long trend. This isn't like overnight suddenly we're not working together. This has been happening since 1980, and it's going to take a while to bring us back together again. So I think the next question is for you, Mason, about schools. It's a tough question, so I'm going to hand it over to you and let you try to deal with that, because it's a tough situation.
Yeah, it is a tough situation. I talked about the Palmyra Eagle School District that just sort of got left hanging in the wind and nearly dissolved. And what a disaster that would have been for those communities and those children, not knowing where they were going to be attending school next year. For me, when we talk about funding things, whether it's education or infrastructure or anything else in our state, economic development, it comes down to our system of taxation here in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is really an outlier nationally. Most states do not fund almost everything through the property tax like we do. So this may be shocking to hear coming from a local city council president and somebody involved with local government, but yes, our property taxes are too high. But I really don't think that by and large it's because of greedy local governments or wasteful school districts. It's because they have to rely on property taxes for almost all of their revenue. So we can look at that and we can consider things like maybe we do get back to indexing the gas tax for inflation and put a little bit more money towards infrastructure, and then we can shift some other money back towards schools. Maybe we do things like legalize marijuana and collect a sales tax on that, like Illinois is doing right now with all of our residents that are coming across their border to buy those products and also pay tolls there. So it comes down to taxation. We need comprehensive tax reform in this state. And one other thing, because we are going to talk about helping small businesses, I think we could strongly reform the personal property tax system, which is a huge burden on small businesses throughout the state.
Yeah, and those are all great points. Just the way we tax in Wisconsin. Now, one of the benefits of this is as we have an economic downturn, there'll still be money for schools to a certain extent, as long as property values hold and people are able to pay their property taxes. Because a lot of states that rely on sales tax are really going to be in a bind. But I think coming out of this, there needs to be a much better understanding of what's the right amount of taxes and how do we split it out. But I think the other thing is, and one of the things I would like to work on at the national level is we need to be investing in infrastructure across the country. And I think school systems are where the federal government could really help from an infrastructure standpoint, be it Wi-Fi for all the households that people have children in, be it investing in green energy for schools. There's a lot of things I think that can be done on a federal level to take some burden off of the local economies, to sort of even it out so that rural America in the cities can be able to have a chance to educate their children in a similar fashion. So we got another question. What do you feel are the chief weaknesses of your opponents? I'm just going to say one thing about Scott Fitzgerald. He has spent an entire career saying no and trying to significantly decrease the size and scope of government. And that has been a trend that's been going on since Ronald Reagan in 1980. And the thing is when times are good and there aren't a problem, there's not a crisis, it works. It keeps money in the hands of people. I still feel we should have been balancing our budget all along the way. We ran up $22 trillion in debt because we refused to pay enough in taxes to cover the wars we were in and all the other stuff. But regardless of that, where we are today, though, is what we found is we've decimated government so badly that we cannot confront things as a government when they need to be confronted in a unified way. And we just can't keep continuing to do this. This idea of small government, or the way Grover Norquist thinks about it, is if you shrink it enough, you can kill it in a bathtub, is ludicrous. And that is the idea that Scott Fitzgerald wants to go to Congress with, is let's keep government small and let the states figure it out, or let local government figure it out. And I agree with Mason, though. There's a lot of things that should be controlled at the local level, but a pandemic is not one of them. That's not the way you want to solve it, is having every single local entity try to figure it out. So that would be what I would say about my my opponent. Mason?
No, that's very fair. So I'll talk about Cody Horlocker briefly, and I want to make clear, as I've said before, I'm not running because I have any kind of personal problem with Cody Horlocker. He's a lot like me. You know, he's a family. He's got a young family. You know, one young child at home, and I think I heard he has another on the way. So if that's true, congratulations to he and his wife. I just think that he's claimed that he speaks out against some of the things his party's leadership are trying to do in their private caucus meetings, but that doesn't translate into how he votes. And yes, a state representative's voting record does matter because that's the measure of success or failure in serving your constituents. And it absolutely matters. He votes with Robin Vos 98% of the time. So there's not really any question of what people are going to get should they reelect him in November. They're going to get somebody who's a rank and file Republican who's going to vote the way he's told. I hear they don't even give you the courtesy of calling. They'll just text you how you're supposed to vote on an upcoming measure. And I can't think of anything more depressing than going to Madison and just having to sit around and wait for your phone to buzz to tell you how to vote. I just think that's not why I would be going to Madison. People in Fort Atkinson know that I can be outspoken on issues when I need to be. And I think Representative Horlocker, he'll show up from time to time in the community. He shows up for the photo ops, but he hasn't shown up for us. And if I'm elected to be your next state representative, I'm going to be a lot different.
Awesome. So yeah, let's go to our next question then, which is really about, okay, let's start talking about the economy, how to get reopened and everything else. So, Mason, I'll let you handle this first. When should safer at home be lifted so our economy can get going again?
Safer at home needs to be lifted when we can be reasonably assured that we're not going to have another outbreak in the pandemic. News has just come out in the last 24 hours that Germany, which was a country that was starting to lift their restrictions, they've already seen spikes go back up. So what I think it really boils down to is that we need to make advancements in medical technology, whether it's developing a vaccine, if there's medications that can help lessen the symptoms patients are experiencing. But really, in the long run, we really need to get more efficient with our healthcare system, because I don't think we're going to be out of this in a month. I'd love to be able to say we're going to be out of this in 90 days. I don't know that we can reasonably predict that. The other thing is, I think Governor Evers right now is taking a very responsible approach to lifting the safer at home restrictions. He recently, through executive order, allowed golf courses to reopen, which I personally thought should have happened sooner, but they at least got to that point. I think people getting out and exercising and getting fresh air is actually going to keep them healthier in the long run. And now just actually today, they've opened up some other small businesses. Things like dog grooming can open up again, repair services, businesses that can offer curbside pickup and things like that. I think that's going to be the model that we have to follow for the next few weeks, is we just gradually open up things, and we need to be careful not to overwhelm public spaces. And we need to be careful that anything we do doesn't overwhelm the public, the healthcare system.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's important for people to understand, like, there's not one party that's trying to open things up and one party that's trying to kill the economy. That's not the way it works. The bottom line is that, at least the way I see it, is we cannot effectively get to where we need to be in an economy without some key things in place. And it really starts with testing. If we don't have very good testing that is basically rapid testing to help people understand if they have it or don't have it, it's going to be very hard to do contact tracing, because if you can't do contact tracing, there's not going to be a way to know where things come from. So those are going to be the two things that we have to have in place in order to be able to get back to leading some kind of semblance of normalcy. And the third piece is going to be a vaccine. there's some really positive news coming out. They think they might have something that, that'll come around sooner rather than later. But I think the expectations have to be that vaccine probably isn't going to be around till next year. So I think the bigger thing is to understand no one's trying to keep people from living their lives or being part of the economy. What we're trying to do is we're trying to keep the number of people that are exposed and die to the lowest possible amount. And, just as a country and as a society and as a world, we've always held human life in higher regard than the economy. It doesn't mean that we should ignore the fact that, mental health is becoming an increasingly higher issue as people are under financial stress. It doesn't mean that, we shouldn't be helping people who might be losing their jobs or losing their businesses, but we got to rally together around this. If we don't rally together and have a sensible plan. And one of the things that disappointed me most was that the Republican legislators, especially in Madison, didn't come up with their own plan. They didn't try to work with the governor on their plan. They went straight to the state Supreme Court. And this is not something, this is the last thing we should be talking about in court is what should we be doing in a public health crisis? This is when leaders step up, let go of their preconceived notions, their biases, and they say, what do we need to do? Because it's about all of us. It's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about all of us doing what we need to do. So I get another question. Small business owners are hurting, but PPP seems to have gone to big businesses. How will you help mom and pop shops? I think there's a little bit of the idea that PPP only went to big businesses. I will tell you that PPP went to businesses who had good bankers. If you had a great relationship with your banker, that bank took care of you, and they tried to make sure you did your application right. They had to make sure that you got all your documentation together, and they're the ones that pushed it through. That we have a lot of banks, not only in Wisconsin, but around the country, who are working their tails off for their customers. And that to me is the problem. We've got a whole bunch of mom and pop shops or smaller businesses that don't have relationship with banks, especially if you look at in the city, in the inner city and in rural America, there might not be these solid relationships. And so there's got to be a way to get those businesses some money or some help that doesn't involve the banking system. There's no easy answer to that, but I think that's going to be one of the keys to help those places most. I would like to see more direct payments to the businesses that didn't get PPP money. I think that would be a wise move. So if you're listed as an owner on your tax return or something else, there should be a way to be able to make more direct payments if you're an owner of a business. Because especially in small communities, because you're the ones that are really trying to hold the community together and they need help. So that's how I would look at that.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that quick. I absolutely agree that PPP, well, for one thing, it ran out way too quickly, but two, it did boil down to who had a relationship with a bank or not. I can speak from personal experience. We applied ourselves for PPE. We actually had to temporarily close 4 of our locations after Safer at Home was enacted, just because our business, especially along our interstate stores, just went completely in the toilet. We couldn't keep them open. We had a very good relationship with a local bank here in Fort Atkinson that we've been doing business with for years and years. I spoke to another small business owner in our community who owns a small auto repair shop. He took some heavy losses and he tried to apply, and because he hadn't really been doing regular banking with any bank, didn't really need much other than running payroll and stuff, he wasn't able to get in. And I just think that's not fair. If a company like Boeing, after 2 weeks of this, was able to snap their fingers and demand a bailout from the federal government, a small business, an auto repair shop in Fort Atkinson, we should be able to at least throw a few $100s their way to at least ease some of the financial pain, because our small businesses are the building blocks of our communities.
Yeah, and I would say one more thing about this is that the United States Postal Service has a plan in place to be able to do banking through the Postal Service. And I think it would be a great idea not only to bring banking to people who normally wouldn't be able to do banking, but it would also provide more fee income for the Postal Service, which is, just like everything else, having a revenue reduction. So I think that would be the other thing to really think about is, because our Postal Service, I mean, Mason, you're doing this. I know I'm doing this. We're collecting signatures right now. And we're just telling people, look, put a stamp on an envelope and send it to us, because it does two things. One, it helps us, and two, it helps the Postal Service. I've been going to our P.O. box every day and pulling out anywhere between 25 and 50 envelopes. And I do two cheers. Like, one, yeah, we got our signatures, but two, that's money back into the Postal Service. So very excited about that. So, but once again, banking through the Postal Service is something I think that we could take another look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. We need to especially for rural parts of the districts that both you and I are running in. The post office is important. If people don't have their local post office to get their mail, for one, if you're having to rely through UPS or FedEx to get all your mail, you're going to be paying much higher rates than that 50-cent stamp that you can pay and have a letter sent across the country. It's going to be several dollars.
Yeah.
Same thing. And then two, well, I'm not sure where I was going with that at this point, but we absolutely have to save the Postal Service. And what I hope somebody like Tom can do, Tom, when you get to Washington, is the federal government doesn't need to be micromanaging the post office to the level they do. They're required, I think, to have on hand 75 years worth of a pension fund, which no business is required.
Just their health benefits. It's 75 years of health benefits, and it is something that the Republicans jammed through, knowing that it was going to cost the Postal Service $5 billion. I think is the number a year. That they have to basically put aside, and there's no other business on the planet that has to do that. So it's completely unfair. But we know Republicans want to privatize things, and the Postal Service has been something they've wanted to privatize for years.
Yeah.
So Mason, you have a question about unemployment. Why don't you talk about that? Because I think that's a really pertinent thing for people right now.
It's very pertinent, and I can do something that I never imagined, but I can speak to this through personal experience. I mentioned a few weeks ago when the coronavirus epidemic really broke out and we went to safer at home in the state, we had to close 4 of our locations. So I'm a franchisee in our company, but I am actually also an employee of our family business. I was actually laid off a few weeks ago. And so for the first time ever, I had to do something that I never imagined, not because there's any shame in it. I just didn't think I was ever going to be in this position. I had to apply for unemployment for the first time ever. And if people tell you it's an easy process and it's just like free money falling from the sky, it's not. It's a burdensome, in-depth application. And then I think the shame of it is there's normally a 7-day waiting period to start collecting unemployment benefits after you've been laid off from work. Our state government should have been able to do the right thing right away, recognize that tens of thousands of Wisconsin residents were getting laid off because of a global crisis, no fault of their own. They should have been able to come back right away and waive that 7-day waiting period. It took them over a month to get that done. And to me, that just shows that the priorities in our state government right now are just completely messed up. They were more concerned about listening to their donors over at the WMC than they were listening to their residents who had gotten laid off and were worrying about how they were going to pay their next rent or mortgage payment. So we need to streamline the process, and especially in a pandemic environment like we're in now, we need to do a lot more. By the way, it took me a good 3 weeks to finally receive my first unemployment payment. And I'm fortunately in a position where I didn't have to worry about paying the mortgage next month. My wife still has a good job for now. She's probably going to be furloughed in a few weeks, but other residents aren't so blessed. They aren't so fortunate. The state government needed to do a lot more for them right away.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say one more thing about that is because we haven't been investing in good government, our systems are antiquated and they're not able to handle large volumes when things change. I mean, you look at the unemployment system, you look at the IRS, the IRS's ability to get that money out to people has been absolutely abysmal. And there's really no reason for it. My son and I, who's an accountant, we spitball back and forth. We came up with like 10 solutions that would have been easier to implement, but because there's not this emphasis on if we're going to do it, let's do it well. The defunding and the lack of leadership has really caused a real problem with that. Real briefly, I got a question. As our congressman, would you consider investigating the president and his team in the initial cover-up of the pandemic and the month delay in starting to address the virus? You know, at this point, the best thing we can do is send Donald Trump home and get Joe Biden in the White House. For us to go back and do anything, let's think about that later. But step number one, because we'll still be in the middle of this pandemic come November, let's get somebody who wants to take charge. Let's get somebody who wants to do the Defense Procurement Act. Let's get somebody in there who wants to do something. We'll deal with Donald Trump later. I think he's going to have lawsuit after lawsuit after him anyways. Step number one, though, is let's win back the White House and let's get to work and fix things. I think going through the motions of investigations right away is just a waste of time. We can figure that out later.
I don't have much more to add. I agree with everything you said. I think, you know, somebody was elected with no experience in government and was quote unquote going to try to run government like a business. And it's been a disaster. So if people aren't going to show up and vote in November, I don't know what to tell you at this point, but any investigation becomes mute if Donald Trump is somehow reelected. Yeah.
Mason, here's a couple of other questions. So for you, Mason, what are your thoughts on the way the stimulus package was rolled out?
The stimulus package in general, there's so many different thoughts on that. I just think way too much of the aid went to big business. You know, Wall Street right away, I think got close to $2 trillion in assistance right away. And meanwhile, you had people getting laid off, worrying about their health care, worrying about their next paycheck. I can't really say anything more about it than way too much help went to the top 1%, as they say, and not enough for the little guys like the working class residents of the 33rd Assembly District.
Yeah, and I would totally agree. And I think, you know, from a bigger picture standpoint, is a big business is being taken care of even before states and before cities. And then before people. It's like the whole thing is reversed in what we really should be doing. You know, the more money we put into the hands of people who don't have the money, the better off we are going to be from an economic standpoint. Because people say, you know, there's this idea of trickle down. We don't have a trickle down economy. We have a bottom up economy. And the more money that's in the hands of the people who are spending most, everyone benefits. So the most of the focus of the money really should have been right down to the local and the people level. The machinery of Wall Street is something that we can't allow credit markets to seize up. But the interesting thing is pandemics are deflationary. So the Fed's just basically pumping money into the system right now, which is good for everybody. There are lessons learned from the Great Depression. There are lessons learned from the last Great Recession that the government is actually using in spite of our president. So Mason, if you can pop up our websites one more time, I just want to talk really briefly about, we're both trying to get on the ballot, which means we need to get signatures. And you'll find our signature pages on our websites. If you haven't, please download our signature page, put it, make sure you sign not only the line, but, sign as as somebody who's collecting the signatures.
Circulator.
The circulator, and drop it in the mail. We're not getting a heck of a lot of guidance from other people who are like, you just got to figure it out. So we're figuring it out, and we're going to be on the ballot, but we need your help. So make sure you go to our websites and do that. You'll learn a lot more about our campaigns. So you see the two websites right there. We got a couple more questions. Why don't we, Mason, let's go to this one. Wisconsin's reopen date is later than some other dates. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'll touch on that briefly because we are pushing close to an hour, and we want to be. We don't want this to go on all night. Anyway, as far as the reopen date, I'm fine with that right now. We're already seeing in Iowa that's taken a much more relaxed approach. I believe their transmission rate is one of the highest in the entire country, and that's a nearby neighboring Midwestern state. If for some reason we get into early summer, and this thing really is tapering off, we can always move the schedule up. But right now, our state government needs to be responsible. They can't give people false hope that this is going to be done in a week, because it's not. We know it's not going to be. So we just need to keep doing things in a gradual, responsible manner. And I just want to say it's been so impressive that the vast majority of Wisconsin residents have been adhering to the safer at home guidelines. They've been responsible. They're doing things like wearing masks. And I think it just goes to show that we're all in this together. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans or big business versus small business, whatever. We're all pulling together as best we can for the most part. And I am so encouraged that the public health is being valued again, because that's one thing most people in government have not been talking about. And the public health has economic value both to our state and to our country. So I'm just glad that we're having these conversations.
Yeah, and that's a great point. There was another question on basically funding for the WHO, and I would say one thing about this is Donald Trump ran on a America First philosophy, and what that means is we don't help the rest of the world, nor do we care about the rest of the world. And I think this is coming back to us over and over again right now through this pandemic, is our lack of leadership in the global area, being able to fund things and being able to help other countries and have other countries help us. It's significantly deteriorated. And, one of the things I'm so excited about a Joe Biden presidency is that he will be able to repair those relationships probably in the fastest way of anybody else we could elect. I saw him speak a couple of years ago, and he was angry. He was angry about those relationships being impaired, and I really think he wants to get going. He's going to be our awesome foreign ambassador to fix those problems, but he's also smart enough to know he's not going to have all the answers. He's going to put a great cabinet together. So I'm very excited when I get to go to Washington to be able to work with them. So I think we're going to wrap it up. I'll do a quick wrap up, and then I'll let Mason handle his wrap up. I just want to thank everybody for showing up. If you're like me, this might be the highlight of your day from a pandemic standpoint. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully you did a few more exciting things. But I just want you to know that we care. And one of the reasons I want to go to Washington is because people like you need a voice. And it's not about big money. It's about doing the right thing. And I think that's so critically important in times like these. And, we got to convince other people, especially independents and people who may not be enamored with Trump, but are still Republicans. We got to convince them that purple is the way we should go. And that's what I'm about. I know that's what Mason's about. But thank you very much for coming tonight. Go to my website, tomforw.com, to learn more about it. Download that signature page. Please send it in. And thanks for showing up tonight. Really appreciate it. So Mason, over to you.
Absolutely. I want to thank everybody again for joining us tonight. I didn't know how this was going to go, but looking at the numbers I can see here from my end, we had a really fantastic turnout in viewership tonight. I should thank my wife, Laura, who's with our two boys, Alexander and Cyrus. They're upstairs watching, and they have been really quiet as well. So that was one thing Laura was worried about, but haven't heard any screaming or anything up there. So that's been good. But I'm just glad that we're having these conversations. And Tom mentioned the color purple, and I happen to be wearing my purple shirt tonight. I've got my purple logo. You guys can see up there. I'm running as a Democrat, but I've been for 3 terms now involved with local government on a nonpartisan basis. And I think all of you, as much as I, want to get our state back to a place where we can talk to each other as friends and neighbors and colleagues, and not as adversarial enemies. We need to get past that in this state. And I had a friend recently tell me, Mason, I used to consider myself an independent, but if I'm honest, I was kind of voting one way a lot lately, and he's going to be voting for me in November. And again, if you want change, if you want this state to get back to nonpartisanship, or I should say bipartisan cooperation, you can't always vote the same people in the same party and over. We need change, and we need to get back to fair maps. Again, you guys have been so great sending in those absentee ballots, so keep those coming. I know Tom is getting very close to his goal. I'm very, very close to my goal, but I don't just want the minimum number of signatures, and I know Tom doesn't either.
Right.
I want to blow this thing out of the water. And so keep those absentee ballots coming. If you can get them to friends in a social distancing way and get their signatures, please do that. And then if you want to be proactive and request an absentee ballot for the fall election, just go to myvote.wi.gov. You can put in your information and request your absentee ballot to be mailed to you. And again, just keep those nomination signatures coming to us any way you can. You can go to our respective websites that you see on the screen. And in November, I think we're going to return to results here in Wisconsin and in Washington. So unless there's anything else, Tom, I think this has been great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, looking forward to the next one. So we'll have to do this soon. So thanks, Mason. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for showing up. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great night.